Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for more conversations. With us is Ray Kelly, New York City's 40th Police Commissioner. For the past 2 years, Ray has been studying the palpable rise in worldwide anti-Semitism. The scourge of anti-Semitism has returned to us with a vengeance. Reviewing the 2018 figures, there's been a 74% spike in anti-Semitic incidents in France, while in Germany there were 62 violent attacks, an increase of 60%, including a Jewish cemetery in Berlin desecrated with swastikas. In Belgium, a carnival float caricatures Orthodox Jews sitting on bags of money. In Hungary, the ultra-right government of Viktor Orban regularly trashes Jewish billionaire George Soros. In Britain, anti-Semitic hate incidents reached a record high, and the demonological view of Israel taken by Labor leader Jeremy Corbyn has nourished Jew hatred to the extent that 9 Labor lawmakers have resigned from their party in protest. Here at home, the situation is no less uncomfortable. The FBI reports that American Jews have been the target of 60% of religiously motivated hate crimes, despite representing just 2% of the population. To discuss why this is happening and what Jewish communities can do to protect themselves, we're honored to have Ray Kelly back with us. Ray, how did you come to work this project, and tell us about it?
Well, Mr. Ronald Lauder, someone that you know well, who is the president of the World Jewish Congress, a prominent New Yorker, actually a prominent citizen of the world, asked me to take a look at this rise in anti-Semitism, particularly in Europe. It's probably higher now than it's ever been after World War II. And he asked that I look at, with a team that I put together, which consists of David Cohn, who worked for me in the NYPD, and Mitch Silber, take a look at ways that we can make the Jewish diaspora somewhat safer. There's lots of surveys that show that anti-Semitism is up. That's a given. The question is, what can we do about it? And there's no easy answer, but that's what we're engaged in now.
So did you visit other countries?
Oh, yes. We've been in...
Tell us where you went.
UK, we've been in France on several occasions, Germany, we've been in Hungary, in Austria, in the Ukraine, and we're going to continue to gather information by going on trips. We'll also be going to Argentina as well. And your numbers are correct. You're right on target. If you look at France, which is a country that has the third highest Jewish population after Israel and the U.S., the numbers are up significantly. The numbers of anti-Semitic events and assaults, really vicious assaults that have taken place last year. A woman, Mrs. Knoll, 85-year-old woman, was killed by an Islamic extremist, murdered. The year before that was Mrs. Halimi, a similar situation. So there is a high level of anxiety for Jewish people in France, and quite frankly, they're leaving, which is something that I don't think is good for France. We'd like to slow that down. People do what's called aliyah, will going to Israel, and they're leaving France. It varies year to year, but certainly in 2015, when we had the Bataclan shooting and the Hyperkosher Market shooting, that was a high. It was about almost 10,000 people left France to go to Israel. And when you look at the total population of Jewish people in France, it's about 450,000. That's less than 1% of the population of the country. So when you have almost 10,000 people leaving, that is a significant reduction. We are putting together plans, formulating plans to increase the safety of, as I say, the Jewish community, doing that through technology, through better training, but it must be in partnership with people on the ground, with French Jewish leaders, for instance, in France and Germany, Hungary, other countries that we see a need for an improvement in the safety of the Jewish life.
So let's start with France, which may be typical in terms of what you did in these various countries. Did you meet with security officials?
Oh, we met with a lot of people. We met with, obviously, Jewish leaders. We met with government leaders, Ministry of the Interior. We met with several former prime ministers. We even wore yarmulkes on the street of Paris to see what the reaction was. There is concern, no question about it. President Macron has spoken forcefully against the rise in anti-Semitism. He recognizes it. He realizes that a lot of it is motivated from the internet, and some of the programming is coming from the Middle East, which certainly doesn't help the situation. In France, what we like to do is add some technology to volunteer organizations that are in place there, to wire synagogues, more cameras, more alarms, to have them use a safety app, which is on your cell phone, enables you to send messages, to send anonymous messages, to take pictures, perhaps. Just like to have those types of devices deployed in France. So we're going forward with that, obviously, with Mr. Lauder's blessing and support.
Anti-Semitism in Europe seems to come from a lot of different quarters. It comes from the political left, like Jeremy Corbyn. It comes from the right, the white nationalists, and even the neo-Nazis in Germany or elsewhere. And it also comes from Muslims who are, and there's an immigration problem in these countries.
Right.
And is there a tendency to blame the Jews for the migration of Muslims into the country? And then is there a hatred of Jews by Muslims because of Israel or for some other reason?
Well, the reality is that the Jews are blamed for everything by many people in Europe, obviously some
for thousands of years
as well. And you're right, it goes back, I think the first indication of Jews in Europe is 163 BCE, as we say, before the Common Era. So they've been there a long time, but they've also been subjected to ejections, expulsions. Spain, Portugal, France, the UK have over history excluded, banned the Jews. So they've been subjected to just a lot of harassment, a lot of persecution. Now, it's a problem that is very difficult to solve because it's hard to get into people's heads. What we're trying to do is make them just a little bit safer by doing these various things, better training of volunteer organizations, getting them equipment that they need. But there's no easy answer. As I said, President Macron has talked forcefully about it, Angela Merkel has, and certainly Theresa May has. So, but you talk about Jeremy Corbyn, he's cause for concern. Of course, he heads the Labour Party in the UK, and as you said in your opening, 9 members of the Labour Party have left the party just recently because they say there is institutionalized anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. Germany, again, your numbers are right on target, about a 60% increase in anti-Semitic acts. They're trying to address that in a variety of ways. There is czar is probably too strong a word, but there is a government official charged with addressing anti-Semitism. That's in the central government. There are 16 states in Germany. 3 of them, and perhaps 4 now, have actually mirrored that and put positions in place to fight against anti-Semitism.
But of course, in Germany, because of its unfortunate history, there is hate speech legislation.
Right.
So anti-Semites are quite limited in the things they can say publicly or say on television or say on the internet.
That's also true in France.
In France as well.
But the question is enforcement.
Yeah.
And, I had people tell me that even though hate speech is being used on the streets or put on shirts, well, if they're arrested, you're just going to put them away for a short period of time and you'll radicalize them. So, quite frankly, it's not enforced. And that really is a big issue in Europe. We need, or the community needs, more law enforcement engagement. Need to go to sensitive locations and protect the Jewish community. They're the ones that are most at risk in this day and age in Western Europe.
What about, I mean, historically, we have had, you mentioned the thousands of years of persecution. That's been largely state-sponsored rather than individual acts. Now we're seeing less state-sponsored anti-Semitism, but we're seeing a lot more, you used to call them lone wolves in the context of New York City terrorism. And so we're seeing, I mean, we had the Pittsburgh attack here. It was a lone wolf who was radicalized somehow or other. And in Europe, we see, I guess, groups or cells of Muslims attacking Jews or individual Muslims attacking Jews.
I think they've always had sort of the neo-Nazi groups, since the end of World War II, but they haven't been as visible as they seem to be now. Somehow they've been empowered. As countries move to populism or move to the right in Europe, they seem to be more emboldened. They're certainly willing to speak publicly more than they were. In Germany, there is a right-wing party, which is Alternatives for Germany, or AfD. It's only been in existence about 5 years, and now it's the fourth most populated party in Germany. And they deny the Holocaust, or at least their founders do. They are very willing to besmirch the reputations of Jewish leaders. We saw in Hungary, George Soros was the target of the re-election campaign for President Orban, and a lot of people say, hey, that was clearly an anti-Semitic effort. So it's more out there than it was, and as you said, it also comes from the left, the BDS movement, boycott, disinvestment, and sanctions. You'll see that on college campuses, university campuses in Europe.
Let's talk for a moment about Israel as being a factor in anti-Semitic feeling. Of course, the Jews historically, since the diaspora, have never had their own army. They've never had their own police force, or if they did, it was very limited. And they had to depend on the host country for their security, and often that was a misplaced reliance. We've seen the apparent re-election of Bibi Netanyahu in Israel. He's viewed as a strong man, as being staunchly anti-Palestinian. Does that tend to put down anti-Semitic feeling, or does it tend to promote anti-Semitic feeling?
I would have to assume that it probably promotes anti-Semitic feeling. The yellow vest demonstration,
Gilets jaunes,
every Saturday in Paris and other places in France. Well, that now has an anti-Semitic element to it. If you listen to some of the chants at those demonstrations, they're very anti-Semitic. But they surveyed them, and it was estimated that almost 50% of them believed in a Zionist plot against them, against France, that it's somehow, everything is somehow manipulated from Israel. So, Zionism is bad, according to a lot of these people, and that very quickly spills over into anti-Semitism. In theory, it's about Israel's policies. Sure, you can question the policies of any government, but it quickly becomes personalized, and it's a manifestation of, in my mind, clear anti-Semitism.
What about here at home? We have an anti-Semitic resurgence at home. I referred to the Pittsburgh atrocity.
Yeah.
We've had other incidents at home. And then, of course, Charlottesville, you had crowds chanting anti-Semitic slogans. And one of Trump's tropes was, these are very good people.
I actually think that was taken out of context. But in any event, there definitely were these groups that showed up in Charlottesville chanting anti-Semitic phrases. And it's just it shows you again that they're getting more visible, more muscular. It's difficult to tell if there are more anti-Semitic events. I think the numbers are reported to be higher. It might just be a function of better reporting. And that's, I would urge anyone that's victimized to report it to the authorities. But yeah, there is a threat here. There's no question about it. And what has happened is the internet has brought them together. You know, you can have these strange thoughts and ideas, you know, by yourself, but the internet is a means to galvanize, to bring like-minded people together.
For instance, an echo chamber where they feed off each other.
They're talking to people who believe
talking to themselves.
The same issues, the same positions, and that's what happened with the with the Pittsburgh, the Tree of Life church. He was on the internet. He was spewing hatred, and he just walked in to a synagogue with a rifle, killed 11 people, wounded 9 others. It brings up an issue, though, in terms of security of houses of worship, particularly Jewish houses of worship. In Europe, there's much more attention paid to the entrance of a synagogue than there is here. You basically have the two-door approach. You can't just walk into a synagogue, the ones that I've seen, you know, without being stopped, without going through sort of a chamber. You don't see that here. I think something that religious institutions, particularly synagogues, have to
Well, you have the same issue with
about.
black churches in the South.
Sure. We had that in Charleston,
Yes.
South Carolina. Yeah, I think all religious institutions need a fairly in-depth security plan. What happens if there is an active shooter? You know, that sort of thing. And police departments will train this. Police departments will gladly come to these facilities and do some training. It's not asked for the most part. I think Pittsburgh was a hard lesson to learn that religious institutions have to pay attention to security. They have to work closely with local police.
Well,
they need technology.
Would you advocate that Jewish worshipers be armed in the synagogue when they go to pray?
No. I think that you can protect worshipers without doing that.
So, is there a program? Are you instituting a program in the United? Let's start with the United States. It's closest to home, where Jewish congregations reinforce security and.
Yeah. There is a program right here that we're aware of, but it was started as a result of Pittsburgh, I believe. And actually, there's money that's been made available to synagogues and other houses of worship to fortify their locations and then get money back from the federal government to be reimbursed by the federal government.
So is hiring armed guards a measure that would be desirable?
I wouldn't advise against it. I think it's fine. A lot of churches and synagogues don't have the money to do that. It's a question of resources. But if you could have a trained armed guard at the facility, sure.
It's a deterrent.
Why not?
You often see on high Jewish holidays police cars in front of Jewish houses of worship, and I guess that's a deterrent. But you were police commissioner. Was it your practice to dispatch police presence to to synagogues
Absolutely.
throughout
And
the
quite
city?
frankly, it's been a practice by the New York City Police Department for a long time. And I don't say New York City is the exception. Other departments do that. But what we have here are the resources to do it. Other places don't have the resources to do it. Here, the resources are made available, and that goes back a long time in the department's history.
We kind of left out Poland, which was the site of the greatest atrocity against Jews in the 20th century, and maybe in all time. Did you visit Poland as part of your
We're actually going
fact-finding
to
trip?
Poland next month, and we'll go to Auschwitz. I've been to Dachau twice, but Poland, we're very much interested in what's happened in Poland. At one time, there were 3 million Jews in Poland before the war. Now, it may be as little as 12,000. So what you see is, a historical process where Jews are moving out of certain countries and indeed ultimately moving out of Europe. And that would be a terrible legacy after, all the sacrifices of World War II to again have Jews pushed out of Europe. As I said, historically, the UK, France, Portugal, Spain, areas in Germany before it was a country, pogroms throughout the 2,000, almost 3,000 years. In Egypt, there's a 3,000 year history of Jews in Egypt, and after the 1967 war, Jews were basically excluded. Same thing with Algeria. So the experience of Jews being pushed out is not a new one to the Jewish world. We don't want to see that fostered. We don't want to see that same situation replicated in this modern age.
But many are leaving voluntarily for Israel because
Well, they're
feel
leaving
safer.
voluntarily for Israel, but the question is, are they leaving for security reasons? Are they leaving for economic reasons? We've talked to a lot of them. It's a combination, but clearly security has an element. Now, their kids, if you have a Jewish family in France and you have kids at school age, you pretty much have to put them in a private school. Because if they're in a public school, they're harassed. 70%.
Harassed by whom? By Muslims?
Well,
or?
by other students, okay? But 70% of school-age Jewish children in France go to private schools. That's the highest percentage of any country in Europe. And it's because of the harassment. So that's the type of thing that will force you to go, to leave the country, to do aliyah to Israel. And the French economy, the yellow vest demonstration has to do to a certain extent with very high taxes. It's difficult for middle class, if there's still a middle class in France, it's difficult for them to survive in the current economic environment that they find themselves in. But security is an element causing them to leave.
Is a measure you've recommended taking down anti-Semitic websites in certain countries so that you can't
Sure.
have these hotbeds of hatred?
Yes, and President Macron putting legislation together to enable the French to do it more effectively. It's sometimes difficult to identify where these transmissions, if you will, are coming from. It's not as easy to do as people think it is, but clearly anti-Semitism is a major issue on the internet and throughout Europe.
Of course, it might be valuable to see who visits these websites, and then that's more of the root cause of the problem than the websites themselves.
Well, yeah, I think they're pretty sophisticated. The French intelligence services are very good. So we'll see what happens with the new laws that President Macron is putting in place.
So you feel he's been supportive?
He has been supportive.
Yes.
Yes, the president has been supportive. Again, it's the question of will things change? You can be supportive, you can say the right things, but the concern is that this is a slow exodus of Jewish people leaving Europe.
So I have a question for you, Ray Kelly, because we've come to the end of our time. Now, 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust, and obviously we don't want to see that happen again. And you have recommended a crackdown on anti-Semitism. What is the best way to prevent this from happening again?
Oh, that is a very difficult question. There's no easy answer to this. So, more security. I'd like to see more security at Jewish institutions, but some of the things that we have talked about should clearly go forward. You should not have impunity on the internet to put out anti-Semitic statements or threaten people. I'd like to see the rules and laws against anti-Semitism enforced. As I said before, that there's this rationale that, oh, you take this person, you put them in jail for a couple of days, then they become more radicalized. Well, let's have that go forward. Start putting some people in jail. In Germany, for instance, they realized the bullying problem of Jewish students in school. They've just brought in 170 anti-bully experts to address the problem. So there's no one answer. You have to go at it where you can go at it in different ways and pieces. But it's been going on for thousands of years.
There's no
logic as to why it goes on.
Yeah, well,
it continues to.
We'll fight it
on.
in ways and in pieces, just as you say. So
you got to fight it any way you can.
Thanks so much for coming by. This has been just marvelous. And
thank you.
Thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations. I'm Jim Zirin. Take care and all the best.